I think the people close to me are very aware of my obsession with internet cultures and how we live in an age where it is so easy to captivate or kind of like, what's the word? Like distill a specific niche emotion that you're feeling in your mind into one perfectly fully, well, maybe not fully, but very adequately expressive meme, text, tweet, opinion. And this is something that I think is like, super, I'd say, underrated about living in the postmodern age. But increasingly, I have thought about how, for me at least, and like a lot of people that are close to me, this has become a very sort of like paralyzing event in the sense that you've got so much access to all this like information, right? And it's at your disposal. I think about the meme that has to do with like the 19-year-old thinker. You've got a person who is growing up, who is maturing per se at this age, and they want to learn more about the world. They want to learn more about everything. They want to explore, see, and like consolidate their information because they have a true like hunger and thirst for or passion for it, but one that is fueled by, I would say, for me personally, but like I know for a lot of people, a lack of understanding of self, right? And so what I've seen is how interesting it is to kind of observe the fact that you get so many people who, let's say, start getting interest in psychoanalysis, philosophy, sociology, because of the way that they had been handled as children or because of the mental health issues, psychological issues, or numerous social issues that they face in their own day-to-day upbringing, their homes. And I find this one of the most fascinating things. I honestly think that it is such a like obviously such a luxury that like I can sit here and like discuss and talk about like these very big, sometimes existential thoughts. There's always the common saying that, oh, someone who's necessarily like someone who's struggling, someone who's got like more immediate urgent things to worry about, like food or shelter, does not have the chance to think about these things. And I do think that such a thing, or like such ruminative thought, should be more accessible to everyone. And it is here where I'd like to say that we need to do a better, as I would say, or as I would call it, like kind of place greater emphasis on the important that such rumination or thinking takes up in our day-to-day space. And the simple reason for that, I think, is because every human functions as a complex, multifaceted being, and we need to understand them as that. We have a hard time doing that, though, as human beings, kind of like conceptualizing everyone else as someone who's got an interconnected and as complex life that I have as an individual myself is something that's difficult. The problem with that is then it becomes easier to narrow down things to, or to narrow down experiences like I was illustrating before, such as, oh, people who've got like more immediate problems do not have the times to think about or contemplate their existence. Or, first we must solve like this certain, like, let me say, core issues before we could give these people the chance. And so I think about how I see that things such as philosophy or things such as like, critical thought are kind of gatekept by academia. And I think it's a bit of an unfortunate like situation because these are not just thoughts that are reserved for when you've had a certain, hierarchy of needs on Maslow's pyramid met. I believe that even when you are in, let's say, the most dire of straits, at the back of your mind, given you, let's say you've got the most minute amount of time to contemplate how you are. I think even the very factor of thinking, oh, I am in this position and I immediately must survive, gives you room for rumination and thinking, how did I get in this position? Or what circumstances have got me in this position, because sometimes people do not obviously get themselves in those positions on purpose. But the circumstances that enable for that to happen, sometimes you think to yourself, why does the world play in certain ways? And I think that very core thought of why does the world treat me in certain ways and others in other people's ways, or like, why are things the way things are? That very question, is something that should be entertained at all levels, all walks of life, and be given more resources for making people, like, more resources rather, to make people answer more effectively. Because that to me is the same issue with having this sort of, like, greater understanding or contemplative thought of like what the meaning of life is, or what a person's purpose is in relation to themselves, their society, regardless of what state that they're in. I find this particularly interesting because, as I was saying before, the way I came towards this like area of like thought, or like kind of like, I would say, thought pattern, I don't know, but like how I received this kind of like, how I got to this level of thinking. God, how I got to this thought process was basically me starting to think about parts in my life that I basically essentially needed to fix. I think everyone before the new year had like a little New Year's goal or like plan that they had or wanted to go through with carrying forward through the year. And part of this like whole kind of like, engaging in like self-help journey and like looking at how to care for yourself ends up like sending you to all these kinds of channels, from like, the fitness gym rats to all the self-care, self-help gurus that you can imagine. And like, philosophy also as a tool for understanding. But I feel like what ends up happening is that we have these people who are introduced to like, especially concepts in like philosophy or like, human understanding through the concept of, if I grasp this, if I understand this, I will significantly be able to function better as a human being or improve. And obviously there are a couple of scholars who argue against this and saying that, the essence of humanity is fully realizing that you are whole in your imperfections. And obviously there are others who are counter grain, talking about how self-improvement and like, kind of like achieving our fully actualized self rather is what we should all strive and aim for. And I find it so interesting how this pipeline starts with like, people who fundamentally think that they're doing something wrong or that they're flawed, and end up like wanting to seek and return so much knowledge that they kind of like gain a larger awareness of the world that exists around us. This is exacerbated for me, and I think for like numerous people in Gen Z or part of the internet who exist in like the postmodern age, by the internet and by how easily information is accessible. Giving like, a form of like obligation or like duty to these people to kind of say, I have all this information at my disposal, and I may not be using it, or I feel like I should be making the most of living in this current day and age, besides, endless consumption, besides constant interaction with advertisements or recreational activities. I must kind of like, make use to the fullest of my abilities the assets that have been given to me through the internet. And I feel like because of this, there's an uprise of a certain demographic of people in the youth that are increasingly thirsting and hungering for knowledge, as I have said, and increasingly learning about the fact that there is more knowledge out there to be learned, and the fact that they want to gain more experience and that they should crave more experience. And I basically say that as a person who finds myself in these circles, I would love to hang with more people who are like this. I find it really, really, really an interesting driving force, but also a bit like curious, like morbidly curious in the sense that all these people are kind of like pursuing these things. Majority of them started not because they desired the actual pursuit of knowledge, but because they desired this kind of like a perfect idealized version of themselves that they would then become through the acquisition of knowledge, through practicing of a skill set, through kind of like expressing themselves in a way that they believe is the most true to themselves. That all started because of a very realistic or a very tangible fear of like being a mediocre, average, or like, far worse version of yourself than you would want to be. And not only that, but like I said, in general, it's all fueled by not so much the pursuit of knowledge, but chronic fears that multiple people have based on like so many backgrounds that they come from. But it get turns into a pursuit of knowledge when you start to interact with, you know, different forms of literature, different forms of film, different forms of media, and everything that we absorb in this age and like, experience on our time here on Earth, on the internet, and so forth. Yeah, so that's something that I find really, really interesting.